Hey everybody, welcome to Question and Answer Time. I'm your host, Adam Neely. I'm here answering all of your questions about bass and music in general. So let's get started.
Question and Answer Time with
Ben Hudson writes, what's the copyright status of AI algorithm music? I assume the creator of the program decides.
So in order for something to be copyrightable, it needs to have three things. The first thing is that it needs to be original. When I was playing around with that Bach AI doodle thing, it was spitting out unique, one-of-a-kind works of art. I mean, they weren't very good, but something doesn't need to be good to be protected by copyright law. The second criteria is the work needs to be fixed in a tangible medium. In this case, the Bach AI doodle was spitting out sheet music, thus fixing it to the medium of sheet music. The third criteria for copyrightability is creativity. Does the work show a minimum amount of creative effort? And this, of course, begs the question, can computers be creative? The US Copyright Act has language that suggests the government thinks that only humans can be creative. In order to be entitled for copyright registration, a work must be the product of human authorship. If we think about this, it makes sense. The point of copyright is to protect the labor necessary to create an artistic work. And in the case of AI music, there simply is no labor. If you put a lot of time and energy and sweat and blood into composing a piece of music, only for somebody else to take that piece of music, reproduce it, and make money without reimbursing you, that would be wrong. Somebody else exploited your aesthetic labor for their benefit, thus disenfranchising you and disincentivizing you from creating more art. In theory, anyway. Copyright is based on the idea that the only reason that you have to create music and art is to make money, and that's just not the case, but the whole system is based on that idea. Keep that in mind. Copyright, in theory, protects you. It wants to motivate you to create more stuff. Now the question is, what motivation does a computer need to create more stuff? I mean, once the algorithm is set up, a computer could just spit out music for forever, really. Computers don't need to be protected by the law the same way that humans do. Maybe yet. Just give it another, 20 years. Now, as human composers start using AI tools more and more in their composing, what might be interesting is the degree of copyright protection the law affords them for using those AI materials. So for example, if a composer took some AI music and tweaked it a little bit, does that count as an original work of art? Or if you had like a computer spit out a bunch of music and had a human select the best chunk of that music, is the process of selecting the music enough to prove human authorship, even if the human didn't write any of the music in the first place? For me personally, yeah, I think that is enough to claim human authorship. The whole creative process for me is just really about wading through all the bad ideas to find the good one. That's the real labor involved. It's not having the idea, it's finding the idea. So I could come up with any number of melodic ideas. Like, for example, or maybe. And in this limited context, there's nothing saying that one idea is better than another. And yet my job as a composer is to decide which of these ideas is best. And whether or not these ideas come from algorithmically generated music or just come from me noodling around at the piano, that's still my job, and that's still where the aesthetic labor lies. So if a human composer uses AI to find that idea, I think that, yeah, that composer has authorship of it. Of course, we're living in a boring, technocratic capitalist dystopia, so I'm sure within the next 5 to 10 years, one of the rent-seeking parasites that are the major music labels will figure out a way of owning the copyright to AI music in a way that totally perverts the idea that copyright is a means of protecting labor. That is totally my opinion as a musician, however. I'm not a lawyer, I don't claim to be. I just think it's very interesting.
James Frank writes, why in your videos when they sing a melody, it's always in the right key?
So in some of my vlogs, when the band leader sings a phrase as a demonstration for the band, it happens to be in the correct key.
Back to the ba-da-boop, ba-da-ba, ba-da-boop, ba-da-ba, and then come down at 102.9.
Yeah.
Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-do.
Is this because the band leaders have perfect pitch? They can just hear a sound and know what pitch it is and be able to sing it? Well, at least in the case of Zach Zinger, no. What he has is something that's, actually I don't even know if it has a name, but we all have it to one degree or another. For example, if you are a bass guitar player and you hear this sound, you know that that is an E, because it's the sound of an open E string, right? You see, when we hear musical sounds, we're perceiving several different things, including the sound's volume, the sound's pitch, but also its timbre, or its tone color. Timbre is the thing that lets us differentiate a violin playing an A from a piano playing an A, for example. We don't need to know that the pitch is an A, but we can hear that it's a violin, and we can hear that it's piano based on its timbre. Now, the interesting thing is, when you practice an instrument day after day, week after week, year after year, you start becoming more attuned to the individual timbral distinctions between notes on your instrument. So for a saxophone player, the note C has a different tone color than the note G, for example. The very subtle differentiation of tone color is not something that non-saxophone players would be able to easily pick up on, but for saxophone players, they can definitely tell. So even if you're not aware that it's the pitch G, like somebody with perfect pitch might, you're aware that it's the timbre that's associated with G, that particular tone color, and you can infer that it's a G from that. This is something that comes through many, many years of practice to know your instrument on that detailed and nuanced of a level. Now, singers can do this too, because they not only can associate the timbre of their voice with specific pitches, but also how those pitches feel in their body. This gives them, trained, aware singers, as well as instrumentalists who are aware of their instrument, this ability that's not quite perfect pitch, but still gives the illusion of perfect pitch. The ability to just know what a pitch is, but in this case, referencing tone color rather than just referencing something innate in your brain. It's really fascinating, and like I said, it doesn't really have a name. It might be associated with something called the Levitin effect, which is when you hear a song over and over again, you can generally remember what key the recording is in. But there really hasn't been any sort of scientific study on this phenomenon, so it doesn't have a name yet. So we'll call it for right now the Atom Bandleader Gig Vlog Thing. God, that's a terrible name. We're sticking with it.
Thomas Carmichael writes, could you do a breakdown of the vocal harmonies on Bury a Friend? I really love them, but I can't find any info on them online.
So Bury a Friend has a rather interesting approach to what we would call contrapuntal motion. Now, when you harmonize a one-voice melody, you're going to have to decide what the other voices are going to do. If those other voices follow the general melodic shape and contour of the first melody, we say that they have parallel, or in some cases, similar motion. Now, this sounds great, but there's not a lot of independence in the individual melodic lines. To get that independence, you can use contrary motion. So if the melody goes up, the harmony goes down, and vice versa. Bury a Friend uses a third kind of contrapuntal motion called oblique motion. When the melody goes up and down, the harmony just kind of stays on the same pitch. This might sound a little strange, because if you keep one contour the same while the other changes, you're changing interval classes on every note. Most of the time when we're harmonizing melodies, we're keeping it within the same ballpark of the intervals. So that's why the oblique motion in Bury a Friend can sound a little strange, and why it's sometimes a little tricky to figure out exactly what's going on with the harmony at the beginning of the song.
Trey O'Brien writes, hey Adam, I'm doing a personal study on emotional implications of chords and chord progressions, and I can't seem to find any info on the topic. Do you have any info or literature that is related to my topic?
So it's going to be hard to find any kind of systematic study of the emotional impact and emotional correlation of different chords, different scales, and different intervals, because those correlations are very culturally dependent. They're dependent on different styles of music. They're also fairly subjective. One book you can read, although you should probably take it with a grain of salt, is Derek Cook's The Language of Music, where he at least gives a good attempt at categorizing musical elements, at least within the Western canon, and how composers use those to achieve certain emotional effects. For example, Cook describes the effect of a minor sixth in an excerpt from Richard Strauss's Don Juan as being one of emotional and almost physical anguish. You might be able to hear it, but that's definitely context specific. Leonard Bernstein had a different sort of appraisal of the feeling of a minor sixth.
Note, and then I move to another note. Right away there's a meaning we can't name, a sort of stretch, a pulling, a pushing, something like that, but it's there.
Patrick Bartley, in my last video, had another appraisal for what a minor sixth means and what it feels like.
One interval, the sixth, is so important to me because it's a feeling of the blues.
Ultimately, it is a subjective thing. However, it does require a fair amount of emotional intelligence and awareness of the things that are happening to you as you are listening to music. This, for me, is one of the great challenges and one of the great joys of being a musician, is dissecting my emotional state and understanding it. Understanding how I can communicate that also with other people using this language of music. But probably not Derek Cooks, because he is not me.
Freetival Music writes, "Hey Adam, I have a question. How do you develop bass fills like the one that you do in the Instagram video of you playing along to Sarah's song?"
Okay, yeah, so Sarah Longfield released this original song called Stay Here. Didn't have any bass on it, so on Instagram I decided that I would noodle some bass over it.
I have seen the lights
So in developing fills, it's important to know what the vocal melody is so that your rhythm does not clash with that vocal melody. It's also important to always stick the landing. So if you're filling, make sure that you really land home where you're supposed to at the beginning of the phrase, very strong and very confidently. For me personally, I'm a big fan of the root 5th, 9th shape, and I grab it whenever I can. I also really like triplet bass fills, descending triplet bass fills. I did that also on J Music Ensemble's cover of Simple and Clean. Filling is fun and can add a lot of excitement, but you have to be very careful about exactly when you do it, because overdoing it can definitely get quite tiresome after a while. I have been very guilty of that sometimes. So right now I'm doing my best to just play the right fills, but only when they're necessary and never when they're not. And I guess that's just it's a good rule for life. Play the right bass fills, but only when necessary.